Good afternoon, everyone. I thank you so much for joining us this evening. You are with DC Action for Children with Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Kim Perry, Executive Director, with my mug of some much needed afternoon caffeine. And I'm joined by 4 candidates: Christina Henderson, Marcus Goodwin, Ed Lazere, and Councilmember Robert White. Let me just make sure I have the okay from my team.
You're great.
Great. Thank you. So for those of you who are not so familiar with DC Action for Children, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization shaping fair and equitable public policy so that all of DC's kids can grow up safe, resilient, powerful, and heard. DC Action is the home of DC Kids Count, Under 3 DC, the Out of School Time Coalition, and we also chair the DC Home Visiting Council. Our collaborative advocacy campaigns empower young people and all residents to raise their voices to create change. The goal of our voter education initiative is to help voters understand where the candidates stand on issues that directly affect the everyday lives of our children and our young people. We produced a candidate questionnaire, thanks to the 4 of you for completing it, as well as many others. We also completed a comprehensive voter guide, and that's available for all of you at dckidscount.org. We also co-hosted candidate forums with other partners, the Office of Campaign Finance, the DC Early Learning Collaborative, and Spaces in Action. And of course, now we're hosting this Coffee with the Candidates, a discussion to dig just a little bit deeper into some of the issues that our kids and our parents and constituency are interested in learning. The questions that we actually ask in this evening's coffee really did come from young people themselves, from parents, and our larger membership coalition and constituency. We have 90 minutes for our discussion this afternoon. We'll allow for 2 minutes for opening remarks. And depending on the question, each candidate will have 2 minutes or 90 seconds to respond. And I'll announce what the time frame is for each question after I ask it. I ask that all of you as candidates be respectful of each other. You all have been on a roll now for several weeks, so I know that's not a problem. I also want you to know, as well as all of our attendees, that the discussion's being recorded because we want to make it available to all of our friends, supporters, and colleagues who couldn't be with us this afternoon. For attendees listening in, if you have questions for the candidates, you can put those questions into the chat, and we will take as many questions as we can before we close out the discussion. So let's get started. So the following statement is actually how I'd like you to frame your opening remarks. Okay, so here we go. While our kids don't vote, they care very much about the decisions being made by elected leaders. They recognize that your values, your principles, and your experiences will have a direct effect on their own education, the healthcare they receive, and how safe they feel in their communities, and also what their future pathways to opportunity are. So tell our young people and their parents who actually do vote why you're the right candidate for the DC Council at this time. And we'll start first with Christina. 2 minutes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kim, and to everyone here who's listening in. My name is Christina Henderson, and I'm one of the candidates for DC Council at Large. A little bit about me really quickly. I'm the daughter of an Army veteran and a retired New York City bus driver. My parents always instilled in my siblings and I the value of hard work, collective action, and fighting for what you believe in, and that's what I've tried to do for my entire career. I've worked on political campaigns to help get some good people elected to office. I've worked for a couple of school systems, including DC public schools. I've advised and worked with US senators, which is what I currently do in my day job. And for 5 years, I had the pleasure and honor of serving residents in the district, first at DCPS and then for 4 years at the DC Council. I was Councilmember David Grasso's first legislative director, and then when he became chair of the Committee on Education, I served as the committee director for 2 years before leaving for my current work. The thread throughout my entire career has been about helping working families and children succeed, because I truly, truly believe that one's zip code should not be a barrier to your opportunity for success. And unfortunately, in the district, we know that's not the case. And that's why I'm running. I'm running because I believe we need a more equitable DC, and because I believe we need more council members who are focused in on policies that are going to make DC more equitable and sustainable for us all. With the driving principle of mine being equity, but also how young people and young families and working families are experiencing this city, I think I am the best candidate for this moment. With my common sense approach to policymaking, experience having done policymaking on both the local and federal level, and an abiding commitment to equity and working with stakeholders. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and I hope to answer more questions.
Thank you. Marcus.
Thank you all so much. I want to open first and foremost by addressing the young people and say, I know and understand the challenges you face because I was once you. I grew up in the District of Columbia, born and raised in the Columbia Heights community, primarily with my mother, but also in the Congress Heights community of Southeast with my father, who divorced at a young age. I know and understand the challenges you face because I've seen them through my life and the life of my 7 siblings. I'm running to solve deep generational inequality that exists here in DC. As a member of the council, I'll focus on building a stronger, more equitable economy by addressing our housing, our education, and our jobs. My mother immigrated here from Senegal. Today she teaches in DC public schools, and my father moved here from South Carolina to attend Howard University. I started my educational journey in the public schools at John Quincy Adams Elementary, but for high school, I got a scholarship to attend St. Albans, where I had a transformative experience. After attending the University of Pennsylvania for my bachelor's and Harvard for my master's, I've spent the last 7 years building housing and commercial properties that promote equitable community growth, provide community benefits agreements to help all people, and I've worked on providing vocational training for our at-risk youth to help them transform their lives and get good paying jobs. I'm focused on keeping all of us safe and helping the council move along and create policies that help our youth, that help our education system, that focus on our teachers, administrators, and our families. That's why I'm endorsed by the Washington Post. Being a native, I know and understand what you're facing, and that's why I'm focused on you. I hope to be a bridge builder that can help move us forward, not keep us stuck in the past of DC. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Ed.
Hey, Kim, thanks so much. Appreciate you being here and holding this, and everyone else for being here as well. So I come to this conversation as both a parent and a longtime advocate for issues that affect children and families. DC's been my home for my entire adult life. This is where I raised my family, and it's where I built my community. And I've been everything from a PTA and LSAT member to a Cub Scout leader, a foster parent, and president of my congregation as well. And it was when my sons, David and Adam, were just little boys that I decided I wanted to devote my career to making DC a more equitable place. And I got that opportunity at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, an organization that I was proud to be the initial executive director of and run for almost 2 decades, only stepping down this past spring to run for office. And at DCFPI, I worked to build coalitions with advocates and residents across the city to use the city's budget to fight for things like affordable housing, investments in schools, and good jobs. And I'm really proud of the things that I've been able to accomplish that support families and children, including the paid family and medical leave program in the city, steering more resources to high poverty schools, and partnering with so many organizations to pass the BRC 3 legislation and then fight for it to get funded. I believe the budget is a moral document because the choices we make in the budget can literally change and save lives. And that's why I focus so much on squeezing as much as I can out of the budget. And I'm running for office because I'm concerned about the city's inequities, that our prosperity is coming at the cost of rising homelessness and displacement of Black and brown residents and continued school inequities. I've seen our city fail to support homeless families. I've seen our city cut funding to schools in Ward 7 and Ward 8. And to me, that's just unacceptable. So I'm running to bring the experience and passion of an advocate into the Wilson building, to be a consistent ally for the advocacy community, to fight for funding for things like the Birth to 3 legislation, and to tackle the city's biggest problems at the scale they demand. And I'm honored that my experience has been recognized and endorsed by Attorney General Carl Racine, Council members Alyssa Silverman, Brianne Nadeau, and soon to be Council member Janice Lewis George, a number of labor unions, a number of social justice organizations like DC for Democracy and the Working Families Party and Jews United for Justice Campaign Fund, as well as environmental groups like Sierra Club, Movement, and Greater Washington. I'm excited to be your next council member and help the city survive and get through this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Ed. I want to welcome Councilmember Robert White. We appreciate you being with us. Thanks for rushing over to this Zoom link from your last Zoom link. We appreciate it. And we're just gonna keep on rolling. Let me read the question to you though one more time, because we've altered the opening statements just a little bit. So while our kids don't vote, they care very much about the decisions being made by elected leaders. They recognize that the values you have, your principles, and your experience will directly affect their education, their healthcare, and how safe they feel in their communities, and the future pathways to opportunity they have. So tell our young people and their parents who actually do vote why you're the right candidate to continue your time on the council.
Thank you very much for having me. My apologies for running a couple of minutes late. In addition to a working campaign, I'm also a dad, and my wife had to leave town in an emergency, so we're figuring it out. But that is an important aspect of what I bring, the perspective of a parent who has, my youngest daughter is 18 months, and so we are dealing with, the early childhood development years. My oldest daughter, who inspired my early childhood education legislation, Madison, is now 4 years old and is a DCPS parent. So I bring the perspective of a parent, and it really was my struggle and my wife's struggle trying to find adequate early childhood education that we could afford, and that had a slot open for us. That inspired my work on the Begin Act, which was nationally recognized early childhood education legislation. This bill, along with a bill that Councilmember Gray wrote, was combined to become the Birth to 3 for All DC Act. So as long as I've been on the council, I've been a champion for education, and specifically for early childhood education. But I also bring a personal experience. Being the only college graduate in my family, my wife and I are both lawyers, and so our existence here in the city is so vastly different than the rest of our families. And I know that the only reason is because of the educational opportunities that I've had. So when I look at the young people in this city and how I need to serve them, I recognize that they deserve to be able to do exactly what I've been able to do, but they have to be able to do it through our public schools. So I fight with everything I have every single day to make sure our city is accountable to our families and the kids that we serve in our schools. I've been one of the most active voices on education issues in our city. I worked hard to increase funding for our at-risk students, including cutting other government programs to make sure we're putting more money for at-risk funds into our schools. I will continue to be a champion on education and on early childhood education. So I'm asking for your vote so we can continue this important fight. I'm number 14 on the ballot and hoping, as the Democratic nominee, hoping to continue to serve on the DC Council.
Thank you. Next question. You'll have a response time of 1 minute or less on this question. And it's an easy question. What's your family's secret to staying sane during the pandemic? And first is Marcus this time.
Well, my mother's an incredible chef, and she still lives in the same house in Columbia Heights that I grew up in. I live in Ward 4 in Shepherd Park now. So we do family dinners in my mother's house. I have 2 older brothers who live in the district and a younger sister. My other 4 siblings currently either live in Virginia or outside the region, but we stay together just as a close-knit, immediate family. A couple of us have spouses that we bring along. So I think it's that kind of close family relationship, walking through Rock Creek Park together, jogging around Anacostia Park, that keeps us sane, breathing fresh air, and appreciating the closeness of each other in this time.
Thank you. Ed.
I guess I just have to be honest that it really started with making sure that each of us defined which part of the house we were going to hang out in so that we were not overlapping with each other and have strong enough internet connection that we could all be doing our work. So that has been super critical. Beyond that, my wife and I were doing daily walks in the afternoon before it got super hot in the summer. And now we just focus on having meals together, including my adult son, David, who's coming over right after this. And I love to bake, as some of you may know, so I continue to bake for my family and make sure that we always have something great for dessert, as well as sharing other responsibilities with my family. So that's how we keep ourselves sane.
Thank you. Councilmember.
Our secret is about balance. As soon as the pandemic started, what I realized is that with the stresses of having 2 young kids and both my wife and I working from home, we had to find a little bit of time for ourselves. So our neighbors and close friends, Roger and Jeff, on Friday evenings for 2 hours, they come watch the girls. My wife and I take dinner into Rock Creek Park, and for 2 hours a week, things are perfect. But understanding the need to keep my wife happy and sane with my schedule, I bought a bike trailer. So on Saturday and Sunday mornings, as soon as the kids wake up, I take them biking into Rock Creek Park and for a breakfast picnic for a few hours so my wife can sleep in and continues to stay with me despite this hectic schedule.
Thank you. Christina.
Yeah, so I have an 18-month-old toddler as well. And for about 7 months, she was home with us, my husband and I, while we were both trying to work from home. So to be honest, we had to buy a lot more things to sort of occupy time, including another bike so that they could actually go on bike rides together through Rock Creek Park. We do a lot of walks, a lot of trips to the playground, just fresh air and the ability for my kid to run till her heart is content so that she will have it all out of her system when we come back home. Oh, and wine. I'm just going to keep it and wine.
Yes, thank you very much. Next question, and this question you'll have 2 minutes to respond. And this question comes from Nadine, a mother of 2. And Nadine asks, as DC plans recovery from COVID-19 and inequities in education, health, and economic security for kids becomes even more apparent, what would you push to invest more in? What would you push to invest more in? And this time we'll start with Ed. Reminder, 2 minutes on the clock.
Yeah, great. Well, the pandemic has exposed inequities in the city so much and widened them. And so I think as we come out of this, if we want to come out of the city stronger, we need to be focused on making sure that every family and every child gets the support they need to sort of come back strong. So I do think that we probably have to do some things differently for the next few years, like invest much more heavily, for example, in our after school and summer programs to help those students who have been falling behind this year because remote learning has not been working for them. Maybe just, open up our rec centers 7 days a week rather than 6, make sure we're using them. Just think more creatively about the things that are exciting to kids and supplemental, like more programs at our libraries and so on. Of course, we also just need to continue to strengthen access to high-speed internet. I love to make that a universal thing in the city for everybody, as well as make sure that families have the technology. I would love the city to be much more transparent with parents about their children's education. I'm really frustrated this week that DCPS announced plans without engaging parents or teachers about how they were going to reopen, and they just can't build trust that way, particularly when parents know that they want their kids to be safe above everything else. They want their kids to get a good education, safe. So I also just encourage the city to be transparent with parents, but also just connect with them and use their knowledge to figure out what's best. I know there's a movement to have more outdoor learning in the city, which I think would be awesome. My kids started in Montessori through grade 4, which was very much focused on outdoor learning. And I know it was very enriching for them. So I'd love the city to think about investing in those sorts of things as well.
Thank you. Robert, Councilmember White.
The first thing that we have to do is frankly make sure our daycares and early childhood development centers make it through this pandemic, because we as a city can't function without them. prior to COVID, they were barely hanging on because of the financial pressures. And during COVID, so far, they have been reimbursed by the Office of the State Superintendent for Education, but that reimbursement may run out soon in large part, and that would lead to massive closures of these centers. And when we do reopen, parents are really going to be stuck, and our city, frankly, will be in big trouble if we let that happen. We also have to invest a lot more in outdoor spaces. We have to make this a family-centric city. What I notice is that when I bike with my girls into Montgomery County, we have more space where the parks are more accommodating. They're more focused on families. It's as if they listened to families as opposed to telling families, this is what we're going to give you. And so really refocusing how we prioritize families and listen to families will help us on the other end of this.
Thank you. Christina.
Yeah, I agree with Robert in terms of childcare centers. I've been sort of harping on this. I view childcare as not just a care issue, it's a workforce issue that's critical to our economy. And I think we're seeing that with COVID-19. If you want families, working parents to be able to go back to work, they need someplace safe for their children to go. And we're going to need to do a lot in terms of stabilizing that market so that it is there and it exists on the other side. I also agree with Ed around digital and broadband. I'd like to see us expand in terms of municipal broadband in the city. We've been able to do that downtown with free Wi-Fi, but we haven't yet accomplished that in our more residential areas. But another issue that I think we're going to have to focus on is around mental health supports for young people and for families. I've been deeply concerned around how some of our young people have been coping in this moment, especially of lots of transition, lots of trauma in a lot of our families, either losing jobs, homelessness, or food insecurity, but also just sort of the isolation of, I miss my friends, right? I miss seeing my favorite teacher, or I miss being able to hug, physical touch. I know that for my little kid, like, she likes hugging on people, and it's just been so hard during the pandemic to do that. And so I feel like we're going to have to figure out some way of how do we deliver those services and make them more broader, in terms of access, just sort of learning from what happened in other cities like New Orleans, where they had massive trauma and it went unaddressed in their young people. And now, multiple years later, they're dealing with sort of the manifestation of that unaddressed trauma. So I feel like in DC, we're going to have to invest a lot more in how we do that for our young people.
Thank you. And Marcus.
My main focus and the issues that I've championed the most is expanding before school and after school programming for all students to ensure that our young people have productive uses of their time instead of spending it all in the streets. I grew up in a DC where my mother didn't come home till 8 p.m. So for me to be in a safe, nurturing, productive environment, I had to have after school programs that had athletics, that had music, that had the performing arts, that had the visual arts, that had tutoring and mentoring available. So I know that those are the kinds of investments we need to make in our schools. I also want to see the district partner with some of the region's largest employers to expand certification programs to get our young people trained to be contractors, to be carpenters, to be plumbers, to be an electrician, so that they can be a part of the growth and development happening around them. And irregardless of whatever educational attainment they end up at, or if they've been involved with our criminal justice system or not, they will have career opportunities made available to them by having a certification, a skill set, and vocational training paid for them. And finally, I certainly want to focus on adults in the district having access to degree and certificate programs that will help them lead to better paying jobs. I think we need to underscore the investment in scholarships for UDC to allow more of our adults in the district to have the opportunity to advance their careers. And I'm from a family where my brother and my mother both attended UDC. So I have profound respect for the university and want to see the district continue to emphasize the opportunities that are available there for people who choose to attend it to further their education.
Thank you. Next question, where you'll have 2 minutes to respond. While there was no national or local precedent for implementing distance learning in public schools, our local implementation has been somewhat disastrous. And certainly it's been void of consultation with educators, consultation with the school community, and timely communication with parents. If you are elected to the DC Council, how will you approach oversight? how will you approach oversight of distance learning in our public schools? And this time, we'll start with Councilmember White.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm one of the most vocal members of the council on education issues and making sure that we are focusing on and listening to families. What has frustrated me to no end is the absolute lack of any transparency or communication with parents, students, teachers, and principals around reopening. When the mayor announced on Monday, without any heads up to parents, to council, to principal, to teachers, that schools were reopening and did not give us any real details of a plan, I knew that the lack of transparency would continue. I had written to the mayor along with several other council members asking for information so that parents and teachers can make this call as to whether they feel safe given our plan, but that information never came forward. So now I'm calling on a public hearing to really allow parents and school staff to voice their concerns and get a response. We're asking people to entrust their health and their lives in our school system without giving them the information they need to make that determination. We cannot do that. If we continue to do this, we will continue to lose the trust of parents and the people who choose to work in our DC public schools, and it absolutely will lead to a further decline in our schools, which none of us want to see. So I will continue to be very hard on DCPS, to be very vocal in fighting for parents and for school staff.
Thank you. Christina.
Yeah, so I've learned from my experience both working at the council and also working at an agency that oversight needs to be consistent and persistent in order to be effective. It also needs to be very transparent. You asking a question in an office of an agency head, but never explaining to the public what that conversation was about or what those outcomes were, does not further the process in terms of oversight. And so I think that that is definitely what's needed here in sort of the distance learning conversation, persistent and consistent oversight, but also pushing our agency partners to be more partners with the families and the workforce for whom they employ. When I saw the news about the reopening, I was shocked because no one had been talking about this as an option. And I certainly know that no one had been having conversations with teachers and principals. And I feel like if this is going to work, you need the buy-in from the workforce, but also we probably could have formulated our reopening in a way that was better suited for our students. For instance, for a long time, people have been talking about you needed to focus on the ECE grades, pre-K3, pre-K4, kindergarten, and first grade, because those students are the ones that are struggling the most in terms of their virtual environment. Us deciding to open up schools, but only provide one class of each grade means that when those cohorts come together, there will be further gaps behind because some 4-year-old didn't get the same type of education that the other one got from having the value of in-person instruction. And so I just really wish that DCPS had further engaged educators on this, because I feel like there was probably a way to do this and do this well. And instead, I think there is going to be significant issues in the way that we've probably seen in some cities like New York City right now that they're having in their sort of reopening debacle.
Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, I think it's critically important that we ensure this consultation with educators, administrators, and families. Me, like many other people, were floored. My mother is a DC public school teacher teaching kindergarten, and she was blindsided by the revelation. So I think one of the chief focuses for me as a member of council will be on transparency, accountability, and communication. We need to put in place with our current educational landscape as much of these accountability and oversight measures as possible so that there's transparent actions, there's transparent conversations, there's accountability for decisions that are made, there is transparency to know when decisions are about to be made, and there's communication between the parents, the administrators, the educators, so that when we make decisions like these, there are more people brought to the table. I think that these decisions should not be made in a vacuum unilaterally as they have been in the past. They need to happen with full communication with community members. And I want to see going forward that we have a better process in place and a stronger council to push to ensure that the executive can't make decisions like these without us at the table.
Thank you. Ed.
So, my family, we're empty nesters. My kids are grown, but I do feel deeply for parents with children at home who are struggling with remote learning and just the lack of clarity and guidance from DCPS. I've just heard from and spoken to so many frustrated parents trying to make this work and trying to do the right thing for their kids. And I think every parent and every teacher and probably most students want to get back to in-person learning, but they can only do that when they feel confidence that that the staff are being taken care of and that schools will in fact be safe. And I think unfortunately DCPS undermines its credibility and trust on such an important issue when they don't collaborate, they don't engage. And I've just seen it from the beginning, including seeing a long list of questions from the Washington Teachers Union to DCPS saying, we want to go back into classrooms, but here are some questions we have about what you're going to do in terms of providing PPE, what you're going to do in terms of providing nursing in the school. What will you do for parents, for teachers who have their own children in childcare and their childcare is closed? Like a host of very legitimate issues and similar issues from parents as well. And DCPS simply not answering that and going ahead and announcing their plans to the frustration of everybody. And that just has to stop. And I think the council's role when the administration is not listening is to sort of make them listen. So as a council member, I would gather those questions from the teachers union. I would gather those questions from parents. I would hold a hearing and bring the chancellor and others out to answer the questions that they're not getting, that parents and teachers aren't answered. I'd use my power as a council member to get those questions answered for parents. And as far as I know, the council hasn't done that right now, but that's sort of what I think the council's role is to be the voice for parents and teachers and other residents when the administration is not listening and not responding.
Thank you so much to all of you for answering that. Our next question comes from Carla. She is a student at Anacostia High School and wants to know. She says, the mayor doesn't really have a plan for high school graduates that aren't going to college. I'm interested in getting a job in the trades. As a DC council member, what ideas do you have to make sure career and technical education is available for more youth? We'll start this time with Christina.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I feel like we need to do more to make our vocational and career and technical education programs more robust. But in particular, what I'd like to see is that our LEAs work more in connection and partnership with UDC. Ideally, we would have a young person who is graduating from high school and at the same time also is getting their associate's degree or another credential so that they can go into the workforce and be fully prepared for the jobs that are available that don't require a college education in DC. This is something we've heard a lot from students, but we haven't really done that yet. We've had a lot of focus around college readiness, which is totally fine. And I think it's great in terms of us pushing that. However, we need to provide other options. And I feel like in the career and technical education space too, that's also an opportunity for the city to grow our own entrepreneurs, whether they want their own, mechanic business or plumbing or computer trades, whatever it is. I just feel like as we look forward into the city, wanting to have more entrepreneurs, more small businesses that are grown and bred here in the District of Columbia should be super important. And I feel like we can better use our public education system so that our young people don't feel like they're wasting time, right? Give me the opportunity to learn my trade and my craft while I'm also in high school. Don't tell me after I get the high school diploma that that is not good enough to do anything more, because then I feel like I have wasted time.
Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, I literally just posted about this today on social media, and one of our core platform issues is expanding access to vocational trade training for people in our school system, because I've been executive director of a 501c3 nonprofit here in the District of Columbia that provides training to be a carpenter, plumber, or electrician for young people. Irregardless of your educational background, with a high school diploma certainly helps, but with or without a college degree, you can learn a trade skill and certification that can either land you a job that's highly paid, that will never be outsourced to another country, or you could be an entrepreneur, creating your own business, your own pathway. And those are the pathways I think we need to start to create for our young people. We see a lot of growth and prosperity around the district, but oftentimes, if you look at the license plate of people working on our job sites or construction sites. They don't have DC license plates. So we need a trained and skilled labor force here in the district. And we need young people that are interested in these kinds of jobs because they are good paying career jobs with benefits, and they open the doors to entrepreneurial pathways. I think the council has an obligation to step up and support more job training through our Department of Employment Services to get young people involved in the trades and placed in with these companies that are getting funding from the city, that are getting property from the city to hire our local workforce and get them involved in building their careers. So thank you for that question. I think it's an incredible dream and I encourage it and want to, as a member of council, support it.
Thank you. Ed.
Yeah, so, you know, DCPS has the goal of making sure that every student graduates either career ready or college ready. And it is a great goal. And then the question is, why don't we actually live up to it? And so I'm deeply frustrated. And I know a lot of DC residents are by the really poor quality of workforce development programs in the city. And one of the saddest things I have heard and continue and hear over and over again are people who say, you know, I went through training, I got a certificate, and then no one connected me to a job. And like, how disappointing and challenging and frustrating is that? And it sounds like in this case, we're talking about no one even coming and offering training to get a job. So we obviously need to be doing much more to connect students to career opportunities before they get out of school. To me, that starts with doing things early on, like exposing children to occupations and in middle school rather than waiting to high school, helping them think about what their career might look like. I think it means like working with the industries that create good paying jobs that don't require college education in healthcare or IT, for example, helping understand exactly what kind of training they need, and then making sure that DC schools do that training. And in my advocacy, I know I've at times talked to some groups like who wanted to bring nursing assistant programs into DC schools only to hit a brick wall and talking to DCPS and not finding any opening. And that's unfortunate. So we need to be looking for those partners who are willing to help plan the training within the schools and not turn them away, work with them. We need to work with our unions, who I know are also super eager to train DC residents for skilled trade jobs that pay super well. And again, often hit a brick wall with the District of Columbia. So we just need the city to be much more responsive to engaging those partners and engaging industries to find out like what are the best job opportunities, what's the right kind of training, and then make sure that we are offering that training within the schools, either directly or through the partners who are ready, willing, and able to do that and be the partners that we need. Thank you. And Councilmember White.
Carla, thank you for the question. I want you to know you're not alone in this concern. Somewhat surprisingly, the issue of career and technical education is probably the most frequent issue that comes up at community meetings and meet and greets that I'm at. It's for that reason that I've actually engaged the career and technical education arm of DC Public Schools. I met with them about 2 weeks ago because I wanted to understand why we didn't have a more robust career and technical education program. What they showed me was that they actually do have a significant number of career and technical education programs across the city. And that might surprise you, but here's the reason. The career and technical education in DC Public Schools has changed its focus from skills that can get you a job when you graduate high school to things that you still need a degree in order to get into the field, things like aeronautics and engineering. So my suggestion to DCPS was that they perhaps have missed the mark and that they need to engage people like you to understand what it is you are looking for, what jobs you want on the back end, and then create partnerships with companies in DC so that you can get your certification upon graduation and get right to work and make some money. So here's what I would ask, Carla. Email me so you can come to my follow-up meeting, because I told them I'm going to come back with some young people, and maybe you can help me gather some other folks who are interested, and we can set DCPS straight together. So if you're listening, my email address is rwhite@dccouncil.us.
Thank you very much. Our next question is, we're going to switch reels just a little bit and talk housing and economic security. So thank you for answering one of the questions in our questionnaire about how district agencies can better coordinate services for youth experiencing homelessness. 14-year-old Sierra wants to know this. What's an approach to combat youth homelessness that you can get behind? So her question is, there's been other proposals before, but what's a proposal that you would get behind and move forward? And we will start, so 2 minutes, and we'll start first with Marcus.
Yeah, I think legislation that the council has passed and needs to act on in a time like now during COVID, and certainly Councilmember White has talked a lot about it, is DOPA, and that is the District Opportunity to Purchase Act, using commercial properties that right now, frankly, are under or unutilized and creating more housing opportunities. I know that when I grew up, on my block was a house for our young juveniles who are coming back from being involved in the criminal justice system. And it was a great, loving, nurturing environment. And they were part of the community like anyone else. And I'm friends with a lot of the young men who are there to this day. But I think that we've lost a lot of these spaces where we can have safe, productive environments for our young people to be in. And I want to see the district look at some of the commercial properties around. And I know that there's plentiful opportunities, being someone who's worked in real estate recently. And we need to start to look at that as spaces that we can start to create spaces for our youth who are experiencing homelessness, and really want to see it be as rare, brief, and non-recurring as possible. And by taking advantage of the properties that we have and investing as a district in creating housing, creating re-entry opportunities, we can start to create those spaces that will help chart a pathway for our young population that's experiencing homelessness to get back on track, follow their educational journey, follow their professional journey, and live up to the dreams that they hope and have for themselves.
Thank you. Ed.
Thanks, Kim. So one of my closest friends is someone I've known for over 25 years. Someone I first met when she was in fact homeless, just in front of my office building. She was pregnant and had a 6-year-old with her, and it was obviously a heartbreaking thing and not something you can just walk by and ignore. And we just struck up a conversation, and the relationship just went from there. And a lot of the work that I've done as an advocate is to try to help families like my friend, because I know what a difference it can make to have stable and affordable housing, and what a shame it is when you don't. And in this case, they ultimately were able to get into subsidized housing, and that allowed this mom, who was a loving, wonderful person who wanted to do best for her kids, to provide stability. And now her 4 children are all grown and doing great things. So I do have a vision of making sure that every single family with children has access to affordable housing in the city. And I want us to fight to fulfill that vision. And in many ways, that really just means we need more affordable housing. Unfortunately, for families with children, the biggest challenge is that housing is just too expensive if you need a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment. And we're as a city not subsidizing, we're not investing enough in affordable housing. Housing is just 3% of our budget, and it's clearly way more than 3% of our city's problems. And even when we're building affordable housing, unfortunately, we define affordable at a range of income levels, and it doesn't always reach the lowest income families. And I think in the last 4 years, we built enough affordable housing to help just 10% of the lowest income families who need help. And clearly that is not adequate. So if we really care about housing equity and racial equity in the city, we have to greatly increase our investment in affordable housing to reach every family with children. We also just have to do once children experience homelessness to help them, coordinating, making sure they can get to school. All the agencies that families with children, like OSSI and the Department of Human Services, just need to do a much better job of wrapping their arms around those families to give them the supports they need to get them through the trauma and get them into more stability. And finally, I don't know if I'm also eager to see the city reform its rapid rehousing program, which just hasn't served families well.
Thank you. Councilmember White.
Sierra, thank you for the question. There are 3 things that we need to do that I could get behind to prevent and support youth homelessness. The first is to try our best to prevent it. We have to continue to support and fund the agencies and nonprofits that work with families to address the underlying issues, whether they are basic economic issues or if they're family issues or mental health issues. At all places possible, we want to prevent youth homelessness. When youth homelessness does occur, though, those young people need a place to go. We can't have young people on our streets. That is not a recipe for success. One of the things that I've done since I've been on the council is increase funding to the nonprofits that create spaces and living spaces and temporary living spaces for young people experiencing homelessness. And that's something that I will continue to fight for. The last thing we need to do is to continue to improve our foster care program. There are a lot of great folks in our city who have space in their homes and their hearts for young people, but getting through the foster program can be quite difficult and incredibly lengthy. And certainly we want to do everything we can to keep our young people safe, but we also want to make sure that those folks who are going to provide a good home and some good support system have the ability to do so without so many hurdles that it becomes preventative.
Thank you. Christina.
Yeah, so obviously homelessness is a really big challenge that we are facing in the district. And I feel like as a city, we need for our affordable housing goals to more align with our goals around ending homelessness in our city. I think Ed mentioned earlier around the rapid rehousing program, which is something that I've talked about, whereas we know that once a family gets to the end of their voucher program, or the time in the rapid rehousing program, that the vast majority of them cannot afford the market rate rent for the unit that they're currently in. And yet we haven't added any additional dollars into permanent vouchers and then other types of supports. And so I think that's incredibly important for us to align and target our incentives with developers and other businesses to ensure that we're providing homes that are suitable for families. A lot of our affordable housing stocks in DC are studios and 1-bedrooms, which is not suitable if you have 2 or 3 children in order to do that. Another thing that I think is incredibly important is supporting organizations that provide assistance to LGBTQ youth who are also homeless and are in situations that are not great for them at home. I think those organizations have been able to provide great resources and support to young people in our city, but they're definitely a lot more, and they need more resources in order to support those young folks through that period of time. And so I think we need to continue to invest in terms of homelessness and housing solutions. But I feel like if we're going to move towards equity, we definitely need to be more targeted and intentional with how we spend our money to ensure that we're getting the outcome that we are looking for.
Thank you. So our next question is from 15-year-old Evie, but this is a yes or no question around community safety. So Evie wants to know yes or no, and we can do by a show of hands since this is a webinar and everyone can see your screens. Do you support reducing MPD's $500 million plus budget and reinvesting those dollars into Black communities? So by a show of hands, do you support reducing MPD's $500 million plus budget and reinvesting those dollars into Black communities? Thank you very much. I'll just note Christina, Ed, and Robert's hand was up. Marcus, yours was not. Tell us why. Tell Evie why.
Well, as of yesterday, we went beyond 150 homicides in the District of Columbia in 2020, and that's 150 too many. I know that our communities are experiencing an increase in violent crime, and I think in a time like now, while investing in Black communities, these things should not be mutually exclusive. I do want to see more investments in our schools. I want to see more investment in homelessness services, in affordable housing, in mental health services and addiction treatment. However, I don't want to do it at the cost of making people feel less safe being in their community. I do think we need dramatic reforms to our policing, ensuring that our officers are more integrated into the community, working collaboratively to find longer-term solutions to our problems by addressing and helping improve people's lives, working side by side with health and human services workers and social workers. So I don't think these things are mutually exclusive, and I certainly don't want to jeopardize our ability to provide for public safety, and we've really struggled to do that with the budget as it is.
Thank you. So now the next question, slightly related. This question is, too often we send an armed officer out to solve a challenge meant for a social worker. How would you reform community policing to ensure that young people don't feel over-policed in their schools and in their neighborhoods. And we'll start first this time with Ed. You're on mute.
Just having trouble clicking that button. So, my kids went all the way through DC public schools, and they had, schools where they had to go through metal detectors to get into the building. And clearly that just send a message to them that the building you're entering isn't a place that you should feel safe and secure. And that's like the worst thing that we want for a school, right? We want our schools to feel like they are warm and welcoming places. So I think, unfortunately, a police presence, particularly an armed police presence, and our police look so heavily armed right now is another thing that is not welcoming. So I am very much of the idea that we should be reimagining how we create and support communities, deal with communities and youth positively and humanely, think of them as humans rather than as the enemy that, with a military force coming into their community. So I'm very much in support of shifting away from traditional policing. So I answered the previous question because I think we should actually reduce the size of our police force because it's already large. We spend more on police per capita than any major US city anyway, and it's clearly not creating a safety. It often targets Black and brown communities and escalates rather than de-escalates. So I'd love to see the city shift away from traditional policing and invest much more in community-based mediation and mentorship and violence interruption services, social workers, taking away any function from the police that they really don't need to be addressing, like mental health issues of people on the street, or even traffic stops, and just shift those to other agencies, resulting in a much smaller police force and resulting in DC residents engaging more with people that they feel comfortable with, who are there to help them, rather than people who feel like a threat in their community, which unfortunately is too often what police feel like.
Thank you. Councilmember White.
Yes, thank you for, excuse me, the question. I think to ask, about community policing is really to miss what we should do here. Police should be focused on public safety issues. In your question, you imply that mental health is not a public safety issue. It generally is not. It is something that should be responded to by public health professionals. So we need to trim off some of our police department and really shift that funding to public health professionals who can appropriately respond. We don't need armed police having exclusive jurisdiction over people who make a right turn or at a red light. That is not a public safety issue. That's a traffic issue. We need to cut MPD's budget and move that money to somebody else that focuses on traffic issue. We don't need armed police for noise complaints, for most domestic disputes. And so what we really have to do is scrutinize the calls to MPD and understand what is the most appropriate agency that either exists now or needs to exist, and appropriate that money accordingly so that you have a smaller police force that focuses on public safety, but we're shifting a lot of that money to programs that, one, are going to improve relationships between communities of color and our police, but two, address the underlying issues. I also want to say this. We're never going to see a significant reduction in crime until we stabilize housing and education in this city. We can throw as much money as we want at anything we want, but without those two elements, we're going to continue to see high crime, and crime is going to be cyclical. It is not right now, nor has it ever been, tied to the number of police. It's not true that the more police we have, the less crime we have. What is instead true is that we increase the police force every single year, and just like every other metropolitan area, some years we have high violent crime and some years we have low violent crime, and nobody can really tell you why.
Thank you very much. Christina, you're up next.
Yeah. So I think we need to move from an over-reliance on law enforcement to handle our public safety issues. And some of these issues and challenges that we are facing are really stemming from a policy failure that has led to poverty. I feel like as a city, if we say that we really want to address dismantling mass incarceration and dealing with community solutions, then we need to fund those solutions, right? We need to fund and invest in the underlying issues that lead to crime and violence in our communities, whether it be housing, lack of jobs, mental health support, support or having some place for young people to go. In particular, though, to the question around how young people are experiencing policing in our city, I do think it's appropriate for us to remove armed police officers from our schools. I remember seeing a young kid who's at an education campus who has like a SpongeBob backpack being patted down. That is not a way to enter into a welcoming environment. But also, I think that we need to focus a lot more, well, not focus a lot more, but I do think part of the conversation needs to be around how Metro Transit Police is also dealing with our young people and juveniles. So back when we were commuting and kids were going into school, Metro Transit Police was also having a lot of inappropriate interactions, I believe, with juveniles in our city that is contributing to the overall sort of distrust we have in our communities around policing and our young people. And oftentimes Metro Transit Police is left out in terms of what we're doing from an oversight capacity in DC. I am supportive of the legislation that the council is considering now around the policing reforms, but one of the things that I've been talking about is the need for us to have a standard in the city in terms of how law enforcement deals with juveniles. Why don't we call guardians or legal parents, when a young person is being questioned or stopped by MPD? Why don't we have a standard in terms of the age that you could put handcuffs on a young person in this city? But also, I think we need to have a more disaggregation of the data in terms of stop and frisk and other things, so that we can really determine how often young people in our city are being stopped and questioned by law enforcement. Thanks.
And Marcus, how would you reform community policing to ensure young people don't feel over-policed in their schools or their neighborhoods?
Yeah, first and foremost, I know that to reduce crime and gun violence, we don't do it by adding more police to the streets or sending more police to communities, because these problems aren't solved by a pair of handcuffs. We have to start addressing the underlying economic and educational causes of crime, because many of our youth aren't getting the good paying jobs or the career opportunities that they need. And that's really the core underlying issue that we have to step up and address by improving our educational system. I support reimagining policing in our communities by expanding access to the services I spoke before about: mental health resources, addiction treatment, homelessness care. Because frankly, like you said, these are situations that police officers aren't properly trained to respond to. Because I really want to see us deal with improving people's status of life, expanding and creating more opportunities for them to pursue their dreams, improving their educational opportunities, improving their professional opportunities. I want the district to partner with employers and provide certification, skills training, and a job guarantee. In the neighborhoods that I grew up in, I can still drive to my mom's house, to my father's house in Ward 8, and see a lot of young men hanging out in the streets, slap boxing, having conversation, but they're not in productive or safe or nurturing environments to be able to live up to their dreams and live up to their full potential. I want to interrupt what they're doing and provide them with opportunities to help them propel their lives forward. It's more important to do that with social workers, with career preparedness, training professionals, rather than police officers.
Thank you for that. This next question is a yes or a no question, and so we could do the same, a show of hands. Our young people have been demanding racial and social justice, advocating for change in both little and big ways. This is nothing new, because it's oftentimes that it's our youth leaders who push us and challenge us to make bold and necessary changes. In DC, many young people want their voices to be heard by winning the right to vote at age 16. Do you support extending the right to vote to our DC residents who are 16 years and older? By a show of hands, if you support Vote 16. Christina, Ed, and Councilmember White have both indicated they do support Vote 16. Marcus, we did not see your hand. Can you please tell our young people why?
Yeah, I know that in the District of Columbia, you have to be 18 to be able to vote. But frankly, you can vote in a primary if you're going to be 18 by the general election date. But I do know that across the United States of America, you have to be at least 18 years old, except for that special situation where you can be 17 years old and vote. I think it's fair for us to, if we seek to be a state, really align our policy with statewide policies although there are some cities in smaller municipalities around the country where 16-year-olds are able to vote. But I really think that beyond the high school education point, where we have, as a society and as a country, have defined adulthood at that 18-year-old mark, is a good age to get people started in our elected process. And frankly, we need to continue to encourage our 18-year-olds to vote, our 19-year-olds to vote. If you look at the voting rate in the district in primary elections for 18 to 25-year-olds, it's below 5%. So I want us to continue to expand voter education for the existing voting population.
Thank you.
Hey, Kim.
Yes.
Would it be okay just to chime in for a minute why we do support, like, rather than just asking the folks who don't support?
Yes, go ahead.
I'll be super quick, but I just want to say, you know, when this was first raised to me, I was a little doubtful because I do have two sons, and at 16, you sort of like, do they have the judgment to vote? And the thing that convinced me was just the research and message that if you really want people to vote at 18, you want to catch them before they get out of high school. You want to catch them while they're still living at home, where you can incorporate it into the education at school and really get them excited about an education and create lifelong voters. So that's really why I support it, is I want to get people into the habit of lifetime voting starting at 16.
Thank you. Christina or Councilmember White, would you like 30 seconds to share why?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ed in terms of starting a habit early, but also when we think about local issues, trash collection, schools being funded, public transportation running on time, these are all things that 16-year-olds deal with and should have a say.
Councilmember White.
I would echo those sentiments. It really is important to create a tradition of voting. Our vote numbers in the District of Columbia show that there are too many people who don't engage our democratic process. That's one of the reasons that I led a bill to expand voting rights here in the District of Columbia to include incarcerated felons, to really expand our democracy and make sure in that case that we are undoing the Jim Crow legacy that disenfranchised many Black voters. But we also have an opportunity to start our kids young. That's the reason I take my daughters with me when I go to vote. It has to be a tradition to engage in democracy.
Thank you very much. This question will have a 2-minute response, and then we'll finish up a couple more with 30-second responses. This one comes from our early learning community. Positive, encouraging adult-centered interactions are important to high-quality early learning, both in home and classroom environments. On our questionnaire, each of you outlined your ideas for fully funding birth to 3, and we appreciate that and read those thoroughly, and the community has read those thoroughly. But the early childhood workforce is facing major challenges due to the pandemic. So tell us your thoughts on ways the city can stabilize the early learning workforce. So here I want to differentiate. We're not just talking about funding early learning programs. We're specifically wanting you to talk about the workforce and the educators in our early learning system. And we will begin first with Robert, and again, 2 minutes for each candidate.
Thank you for the question. Stabilizing the early childhood workforce is something that I've worked very hard to do. These are folks who do some of the most critical work, and as I know, Christina knows in real time, and Ed probably remembers, it is not easy having 1 or 2 young kids, but having multiple of them, teaching them, keeping them safe requires a calling that I do not have. So I'm very grateful that some people do have that calling, that passion, that love for kids. But it's an environment that they can't stay in because they can't afford to. The average salary for early childhood education workers in DC is pennies above the poverty level, when they should be paid on par with our DC public school teachers. That is the only thing that is going to stabilize this workforce. Beyond that, the district has continued to increase the number of certifications that you need to get into and stay in this field. But not everyone has access to free certification classes. So we have to make that free. Right now, there are many for-profit programs that are engaging our young people who want to get into this field. But we have a significant unemployment rate in communities of color, which happen to be the communities that predominantly work in these centers. So we have an opportunity not just to stabilize that workforce, but to create good career options for people of color.
Thank you very much. Christina.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember White. You know, my daughter's lead teacher, she's been doing this for 20 years. So she's been doing this longer than I've been a parent, and I value her attention that she gives to my child each and every day. And it kills me that they are not making the wages necessary in many cases to actually take care of their own families. But I think if you're going to stabilize the workforce, you also have to stabilize the market as well. I do think the recent decision by OSSI to go back to only funding our childcare centers based on the subsidy rate for monthly attendance, as opposed to what it was last year, is going to devastate the market. It is going to devastate the workforce because many of the centers and homes are not operating at full capacity and are going to have trouble paying their workers and keeping them employed. So I think it's a mixture of things. We have to continue to stabilize the market. We need to provide more assistance in terms of the certifications that we're requiring, while also providing, I think, a little bit more grandfathering in. If you've been in the childcare workforce for 20 years, to say that you now need a degree in order to do this work that you've been doing your entire life, I think is unacceptable. But also, I feel like we need to invest more in workforce housing as well, so that childcare workers can stay and live in the communities for which they serve. And I think that would actually be more helpful for all of our teachers, firefighters, police officers, things like that. So I feel like when we're talking about the workforce, it has to be a more comprehensive conversation, and also looking at to how some other cities have done this. For instance, in New York City, I know that some of their childcare workers are unionized and are considered city employees. And I'm not saying that's a method we should take, but it's something we should certainly look at in terms of how we increase the overall compensation for our childcare workers.
Thank you. Marcus?
Yeah, and as the son of an early childhood educator, I know and understand that the compensation is not aligned with the realities of living in the district. And one of the key issues that I've championed along the campaign trail is focusing on a workforce housing fund that will help our educators, our police officers, our firefighters, our emergency medical workers find housing options in the district. And currently we don't do enough, and the cost of living is far exceeded the compensation that these people are receiving for the great, incredible work that they do. So I do think that part of the solution here is introducing any legislation that allows us to continue to see their salaries, their compensation rise at a rate that they can afford to stay in the District of Columbia, but also providing housing options with all of the available opportunities that we present, both in funding, financing, and the disposition of land, to create more spaces where people who are in these fields that are so desperately in need of finding a permanent home in the district can find an opportunity for them to be able to stay. So those are the policies that I would be supportive of, ensuring that their economic circumstance, both from a housing and a compensation perspective, meets the realities of living in the District of Columbia.
Thank you. And then finally, Ed, what are your thoughts on ways the city can stabilize the early learning workforce?
Yeah, so when you asked the question, the first thing that came to my mind was Ms. Latson, who was the teacher's aide in my son Adam's class when he started Montessori at age 3, and was, he just needed a lot of guidance. And she was this very loving, patient presence in his life, and just made a huge difference for him. And then I was shocked to later find out that she was barely making $30,000 a year working as a DC government employee, and that's clearly unacceptable. That's why I've been part of, at the Fiscal Policy Institute, the coalition around the Birth to 3 legislation to fight for better pay for early childhood educators, as I think Councilmember White talked about. I just think in general, we just as a community need to show that we respect the people who take care of our children, and the low pay for the women who, primarily women of color who work in early childhood education, shows that we don't respect them. But it really just is a matter of valuing. And as a council member, I'm going to show that I care about the people who care for our children, including fighting for better pay and fighting for the Birth to 3 legislation to make sure we can raise their pay. But I also think about what's happening right now with childcare centers and reduced capacity and staffing. We want those workers to stay. We want the businesses to stay open, the providers. So we really do need to subsidize them now to keep them open, even paying workers who may not be working a full schedule, because we need to support them, and we need them to be there when the economy fully recovers and more people are going back to work. And finally, I think about so many early childhood educators being young people themselves, often having children, and those who have children in school who are learning from home and therefore can't work. And we need to support them by making sure that if you are home with your child because of remote learning and cannot work, even if you want to, even though you want to, that we support you with unemployment insurance. We need to make sure that we are assisting people who are home because they are needing to take care of their children, even if they want to work. And that's another way to stabilize
5 seconds.
Workers, including our early childhood educators.
Thank you so much for that. We're doing really great on time, and we're going to be able to get you all out of here on time. We are now moving to some questions that have come up, both in the chat and I believe the Q&A. The first question I have here is actually for Marcus. So I'm going to read and make sure I get this right. Marcus, we want to follow up with you on your response. In the DC Action questionnaire, you said you would support raising taxes on people earning more than $250,000. But on the BARD in DC candidate questionnaire and at the City Paper Forum, you told Mitch Riles that you opposed doing so. Could you please clarify your position and tell us when you changed your mind?
Yeah, I'm not sure how it came up to a yes, but my answer has consistently been no. So I'll clarify it and say no, that I won't support right now. And certainly I would have voted against it as the council did 8-5 when it came up earlier this summer before the summer recess. So I think that must have been a mistake. And I think my answer clarifies that I'm focused on ending tax avoidance in the District of Columbia and ensuring that as much as possible, we end any tax loopholes that people are taking advantage of with their income tax returns to the district and repatriate those dollars as a way to find income over the prevailing tax rates. But I do not support raising income taxes right now for high income earners over $250,000. So I apologize, that's a mistake. And I thought I was consistent and maybe needed to review it again. But I did see that online and I told my campaign manager to email you and say that that's not a right answer. So I'm not sure how that came up.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. We appreciate it. And thank you to our attendee who asked that question. Hold on just a minute. Just trying to queue up the next question. While I'm just getting the next chat question, did anyone else want to clarify or, in all fairness, your positions on raising taxes on some of the highest earners? And of course, that was in the context of realizing revenue will have to be on the table as we make our way through the recovery. Ed, and then Christina and Councilmember.
Sure. I mean, progressive taxation is a tenet of the Democratic Party. It's been supported by, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders and other candidates running for office as well. And I support a progressive tax system. I think the fact that in this pandemic, there are so many residents who are suffering and have lost the entire income while the stock market continues to soar. It's created the most unequal recession we've ever experienced. And I think those who are doing well and who are doing well in the midst of the pandemic have an obligation to support those who are not. The fact that millionaires in the district pay basically the same tax rate on added earnings as a teacher or a nurse tells me that our tax system is not progressive enough. So I do support making our tax system more progressive so that we can raise the revenues to support early childhood educators and do all the other things that we've talked about on this forum tonight.
Thank you. Christina?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look in terms of the priorities and needs that we're gonna, of taking care of our residents as we are staying on this path to recovery, the reality is that we're gonna have to do a mixture of both. We're gonna have to raise revenues, but we're also gonna have to perhaps tighten our belts in other parts of the government budget, whether it be, delaying the streetcar or looking at non-personnel spending within the agencies to do so. But I'm just of the belief that as a city, we need to keep taking care of our residents, making sure that our young people have housing and are clothed and are fed and are getting a quality education, and all those things require funding, which we don't really have right now. So I feel like we're going to have to raise revenues, and asking our wealthiest among us to do a little bit more, I think, is appropriate.
And then finally, Councilmember White.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, what we really have to do is accelerate the reconvening of a tax revision commission so that we have a balance and thought through tax system here in the city that is indeed progressive. And that's something that I've really pushed for since I've been on the council. I'm not a fan of tax measures from the dais, but this tax increase on our wealthiest residents is something that is necessary right now. The reason is that we are facing an unforeseen significant shortfall, and we live in a community. And in our community, the people who make the least are the most vulnerable in every way throughout this COVID-19 crisis. Those who make more have not been significantly affected financially by a large percentage. And so those who have more really have to help those who have less get through this very difficult time.
Thank you. Marcus, is it 15 seconds?
Yeah, just a quick 15-second follow-up. And again, I do not want to raise taxes or the prevailing tax rate on our highest income earners, but I do want to end tax avoidance by scrutinizing business expense deductions, ensuring that people like our purported billionaire president, Donald Trump, taking $70,000 in deductions for his haircuts. That kind of stuff shouldn't fly. I don't think business losses should shield your personal liability. And I don't think that there should be loopholes on properties that you own. So I want to end tax avoidance.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Kim Barnett in the chat. It says, what type and how much of city government's resources should be dedicated to establishing and maintaining a children's performing arts center managed by DC Children's Arts Organizations? And so we will start to the left of my screen with Christina this time.
This is actually, I think, the first time that I'm sort of being presented with this idea, but I like it. I was a kid who grew up in performing arts. I started playing the violin when I was in first grade. I did chorus, I did marching band, I did dance, I did theater. And I think that the arts for young people are certainly an outlet in terms of giving, productive things to do after school, but also in some cases, they're the reason why some young people want to go to school so that they can participate in these programs. And so I think we need to look in terms of how we're using our funding from the Commission on Arts and Humanities, but the other arts buckets that we have. But, I feel like that is certainly an initiative and an idea that I think is certainly worth exploring.
Thank you. Ed.
I guess I'm frustrated that the way we pursue education right now is so focused on just studying reading and just studying math and not exploring the full human being. And as I said, my children started in Montessori, and one of the hugest focus of their Montessori classroom was artwork. And it's just, you love seeing the creativity of children and anybody being expressed. And we really want our education to create full human beings, not just people who can do math and read. And in fact, having greater access to arts probably improves academic performance as well. So I'm super eager to see the city do more to invest in performing arts for children. One of my sons went to the DC Youth Orchestra Program, which is a nonprofit, which created affordable lessons in music lessons. And it was just a great opportunity for him. And my understanding is the Youth Orchestra has produced a huge number of orchestra performers of color. And DC has been a huge contributor to that for that reason. So I'd love to see the district also be a place that creates more dancers and actors and other artists, particularly artists and dancers of color. And what a better way to do that than to support a children's performing arts center.
Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, and I'll echo a lot of those same sentiments because I was a part of the DC Youth Orchestra growing up, playing the violin and the viola. I was a part of the inaugural class at the Sitar Center of the Arts in 1998 when they were just getting started. in a basement on Ontario Road, and know that the full creative expression of our young people in the district is something we can't afford not to invest in. So I certainly support the council investing more in our musical arts and supporting the young next generation. Although I haven't played the viola in years, I still know how to play the piano a little bit. And while it doesn't make me money or isn't part of my profession, it's something that I think has helped me creatively think and explore my professional, personal, and creative energies as an adult.
Thank you so much. And then finally, Councilmember White.
Thank you for the question. I was deeply involved in the arts throughout my youth and into my adulthood. It's something that I continue to support significantly on the council. I've been one of the most active and vocal members of the council in supporting our arts organizations. There are a number of arts organizations that are funded by the city that support young people, including Imagination Stage, DC Strings, Dance Place, the list goes on. But there are also a number of venues that are supported significantly by DC tax dollars, like the National Theater, the Shakespeare Theater, the National Building Museum. And so we have programs and we have venues. So I don't know if the DC government, I don't know if we want DC government running our youth arts program. Maybe it's better to leave that to not DC government. But it is worth a conversation, because I think we all agree that we want to do everything we can to protect and promote the arts for our young people.
Thank you so much. One last question, and then we will wrap up and let everyone attend to their evenings. And this will be a yes or no question, just by show of hands, without follow-up after. And that is, do you support mayoral control of our public schools? By a show of hands, if you do support mayoral control, continued support of mayoral control of public schools, please raise your hand. I see a hand from Marcus and Christina. Thank you very much. So we are going to close up. I want to first say thank you very much to you four for joining us this evening. Our constituency wanted to dig a little deeper. I think we've had a chance to do that. We wish you all well. To those of us to our attendees this evening, a couple of notes for you. Thank you for joining us, first of all. But second, make a plan to vote if you haven't already. Ballots have arrived to each household, so hopefully you've got your ballot. Please don't just make a plan for yourself and your family, but also bring 5 people along with you, or check in on 5 other folks and make sure they have a plan to vote. Next, we really want you all to be involved. If you aren't already, you can sign up to get more involved in DC Votes Under 3 DC Coalition, our Out of School Time Coalition, or the Home Visiting Council by going to dckids.org and just signing up for our newsletter. We appreciate you all's time this evening. Please have a peaceful and a productive evening, and good luck to you all. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Kim.
Thank you so much for having us on this conversation. Have a good night.
Absolutely. Thank you.